Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's lesson for APES. Today's lesson is on the required environmental legislation, the 10 acts and policies that are established to help protect the environment. So we'll begin with the abbreviation EPA. You might have seen these letters before, but you do need to be able to identify that the EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency. Please fill that in your guided notes. Now, you should have been exposed to these 10 policies already when you completed your September assignment. So you've already been introduced to these policies. But today I'd like to get these policies into our notes so we can really begin to identify them, describe them, and apply them to our course. Sorry about that, folks. So we'll begin with the first act, the Clean Air Act, and we'll use abbreviations throughout our lesson. So CAA for the Clean Air Act. So let's begin filling in our notes. In 1950, it was Pennsylvania at the time that was experiencing such smog that the buses could not run without people holding lanterns as they drove through the street. So this was a time when people started to realize that the air was so polluted, something had to be done. And this is where we first see the Clean Air Act of 1963. However, it wasn't until 1970 where Congress passed a much stronger act to really help the air quality. This happened to be the same year that the EPA was created by Congress. And just as you might imagine, the Clean Air Act is reducing air pollution nationwide. In 1990, Congress revised this Clean Air Act once again. And throughout the year, we'll talk more about the air pollution. We have an entire unit based on air pollution. So we'll learn a lot more about that when we study that unit. So if you look at this image, here is a picture of obvious air pollution. But since 1970, when the Clean Air Act was modified, we see a reduction in air pollutants. So the CAA is a policy that is having a positive effect on the environment. Next is our Clean Water Act. Again, we're using abbreviations, so fill that in. The Clean Water Act is going to regulate any discharges of pollutants into our waters. So pollutants being discharged into our waters need to be regulated. This began in 1948. And again, much stricter guidelines were established in 1972. So we see a pattern in 1970s that Americans started to really pay attention to the environment a lot more. So again, this is setting standards for any discharges into our bodies of water. And we have a whole unit dedicated to water pollution, and we'll talk a lot more about this when we study that unit. I just want to make you aware that the Clean Water Act is regulating our bodies of water, not our drinking water. So again, the Clean Water Act protects more than water. Of course, we have our beautiful oceans and rivers and lakes and things we like to enjoy. So this is the Clean Water Act. Number 3, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Animals, which can be called fauna, and flora, plants. So this is abbreviated CITES. So whenever I see the word CITES, to help me recall this law, I look at the letter T, and I always remind myself the T stands for trade. And that will help me identify this policy when I see it, that it's regulating the trade of endangered species, whether they're animals or plants. The T is helping to regulate the trade of these organisms. So again, international trade in specimens of wild animals and plants to ensure that it does not threaten their survival. This will help safeguard any species from overexploitation. So we don't want to be taking animals out of their habitats and bringing them to America and exploiting them. So we do have regulations, which is our CITES. So if you did want to possibly obtain some wild animal or plant, you would need a permit and a special certificate, which can't just be obtaining these things at will. They are regulated. So again, here is our CITES. And if you can remember, the T represents the word trade. And so we got to regulate when we try to obtain or trade these endangered or special organisms. If you look at them, we want to keep them safe in their natural habitats. Okay, number 4, the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act. This is often called the Superfund, and again, we could abbreviate it CERCLA. And to help me remember this law, I look at the letters C and C, and I tell myself these are the cleanup crew. C for cleanup, C for crew, the cleanup crew. And this helps me remember what this law is about. This law is to help clean up any area that has been exposed to hazardous substances and may endanger the public health or the environment. It's an area that is now closed, it's been abandoned, and it's just left in the environment where there might be waste still around, and no one is left to clean it up. Some industry abandoned this site, and now it's just sitting there. It can have a negative effect on the environment, and so somebody has to go in and clean this up. Okay, so this is what the CERCLA is. It's going to assign liability for the persons who are responsible for releasing these hazardous wastes. And then after identifying this particular site, there would be money provided. And we call that the Superfund. It's money that's going to be provided for the cleanup crew when no party could be identified. This particular location has been abandoned. Nobody's going to clean it up. So we have this crew, which I call the cleanup crew, CERCLA, which we have money for them, trust fund money called the Superfund, and we can pay people to clean this particular area up when nobody else is doing it. So this is the CERCLA or Superfund Act. I hope that makes sense. So again, you can identify a Superfund site because it's usually indicated by a sign. Again, there's a cleanup crew that's being sent in. It's funded and by the EPA, so we're able to clean up these abandoned sites. Okay, number 5 is the Montreal Protocol. And this, when you see the word Montreal Protocol, I'd like you to think of the ozone layer and ozone depletion, because this legislation is protecting the ozone layer of our planet. So in 1987, the International Treaty to Protect the Ozone Layer, by phasing out certain substances responsible for ozone depletion. And as a result of this Montreal Protocol, the ozone hole, there was a hole over Antarctica, is slowly recovering. So it has a positive effect on the environment. So if you look here, this is a very thin ozone layer. The blue is lighter in blue and not as dark or surrounding the area. But as you could see, it's getting larger. So the ozone layer is getting larger and thicker. And so this Montreal Protocol protecting the ozone layer is working, because as we could see, it's darker. This blue represents the ozone. It's covering more area. It's getting thicker. It's being repaired. So this protocol is actually helping. Number 6 is the Kyoto Protocol. Number 6, the Kyoto Protocol is going to help with our greenhouse emissions, greenhouse gases. This was in 1997, Japan, trying to reduce global warming. The treaty was signed by a lot of different countries. However, there are some countries that have not participated and have not signed the Kyoto Protocol. And as you could see, one of those countries is the United States. So it's something to discuss or to research why the United States did not want to participate. So that might be something you're interested in looking up, and we can discuss more in class. But if we look at a graph of our global temperatures, there's an increase in our global temperature. So we are experiencing global warming, according to scientists and their data. So the Kyoto Protocol is trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to try and reduce our global warming, which is something we'll also talk more about in class. Number 7, the Endangered Species Act, ESA. Began in 1973, President Nixon, in order to conserve threatened and endangered species. Oh, maybe I'll go back. I'm sorry. So often we are looking at different species and how to protect them if they are endangered. So we have the Endangered Species Act. You could look up a list of species that are endangered, that are near extinction, that are getting close to being endangered. So that information you could actually look up. And we'll talk more about the endangered species as we progress through the year. We'll do a little project later on. And there's the polar bear. Number 8 is the Safe Drinking Water Act, SDWA. Remember, this is different from the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act addresses our bodies of water, does not address drinking water. So there's 2 different water laws. The Clean Water Act protects our bodies of water. The SDWA is looking at our drinking water. So the 2 are a little different, okay? Protects public drinking water. There's standards for water quality. When we drink water, there has to be certain standards. This is where our drinking water comes from, the groundwater. And one thing to point out, it does not apply to bottled water, which is very interesting. My next question is, who is regulating our bottled water? Something to think about. Number 9, the Delaney Clause. The Delaney Clause is the only one out of our 10 laws that talks about what we're eating. So this one should be easy for you to identify. It is regulating any kind of food additives, prohibits the use of additives which have not been tested in food. If a substance was found to cause cancer, then it could not be used as a food additive. Examples of these are certain herbicides and pesticides, which are applied to our crops. So the Delaney Clause is protecting our food and drug and cosmetics from any substances that are added that could harm us. So the Delaney Clause regulating any kind of pesticides in our food. Number 10, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, RCRA. So a couple of tips on how to identify this federal law is this is going to help manage hazardous wastes. Any kind of wastes, medical wastes, anything that needs to be disposed of. So let me give you a minute to copy the notes first, and then I'll talk a little bit more about this. So fill in your blanks, please, and then I'll help you understand how to remember this. Okay, so the RCRA, whenever I see these words or these letters for this particular act, I always try to think of the word hazardous waste. Hazardous waste. RCRA, hazardous waste. And that helps me remember that this particular policy regulates how hazardous waste is going to be disposed of. And the words I like to remember is from cradle to grave. And what that basically means is when a place is producing hazardous waste, this act is going to monitor that waste from the cradle to the grave. In other words, where that hazardous waste starts in that industry or that company, and how that waste is stored, and how that waste gets transported, and then ultimately how that waste gets disposed of. So that's what cradle to grave means. So if you look at this image, the RCRA is hazardous waste, and it regulates the waste from the cradle to the grave. So how is that waste generated first? That's the cradle. How is it going to be treated? How is it going to be transported? How is that waste going to be stored? And then last, how is that waste going to be disposed of? That's the grave. So from cradle to grave, the RCRA develops a plan to dispose of this hazardous waste. I hope I explained that good enough. Okay, so we went through the 10 laws you need to be able to identify for the class. And now I would like to play a game called Name That Law. It's exciting, I know. So on your sheet, on your notes, please turn to the next page. And we're going to go through each of these 20 examples. I think what I'm going to do, I want to stop for a moment. I want to back up because before we play Name That Law, I'm sorry. I want you to note at the top of your guided notes to fill in the abbreviations for each of the law. So before we play Name That Law, we can use the abbreviation. So for example, number 1, Clean Air Act. Please fill in the abbreviation. CAA is correct. Number 2, the Clean Water Act. We'll abbreviate CWA. Number 3, Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, CITES, CITES. And I hope you're filling this out on the top portion of Name That Law, our abbreviations. Number 4, the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, CERCLA, which can also be called Superfund. And remember, CERCLA, that's our cleanup crew. Montreal Protocol, next to that term for number 5, please fill in ozone depletion. Montreal Protocol helps with ozone depletion. Number 6, the Kyoto Protocol is for greenhouse gases. Reduces greenhouse gases. Number 7, the Endangered Species Act, abbreviated ESA. Number 8, the Safe Drinking Water Act, SDWA. Remember, that's only our drinking water. The Clean Water Act, CWA, protects our bodies of water, so don't confuse the two. Delaney Clause Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act is our Delaney Clause. That's the only one out of the 10 that has to protect our food. And then number 10, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, RCRA, is for our hazardous waste from cradle to grave. Okay, so now you're going to name that law. It's very exciting. And you're going to fill in, there's going to be 20. I'm going to show you the image. I want you to fill them in, and then we're going to go over them in class. Okay? All right, so here we go. Name that law. Take a look at the image. Think about some of the things I mentioned in the lesson. Give you a little hint right here. And fill it in number 1. And you could use your abbreviations. Okay, let's move on. Name that law. I'm going to play around with this while you're naming that law. Let's see. What's this one? Pen. I'm talking to myself. Okay, number 3. Name that law. Number 4. Name that law. Number 5. Name that law. I'm cracking myself up now. Number 6. Name that law. Number 7. Name that law. Number 8. Name that law. Number 9. Name that law. Number 10. Name it. I wonder if you'll get this one. We'll go over them in class. Number 11. Name that law. Number 12. Name it. There's your hint. Number 13. Name that law. Number 14. 14. Name that law. I like that picture. It's pretty intense. Fifteen. Name that law. Sixteen. Name that law. Seventeen. Name it. Hope you're getting better at this and not worse. I'd rather be doing this in class. I'll go over these in class though. But that was 17. 18. There's a before picture and an after picture. 18. Name that law. $19. There's melting happening here. Name that law. It's 19. What a cute polar bear. And last but not least, number 20. Name that law. All right, folks. This is the end of the lesson. I will see you when I see you, and we'll go over your answers to this fantastic game. We'll see how you did, okay? All right, everybody. Have a great day. Bye.